I'm going to be discussing a technique or method that can help you. When we are paraphrasing content from a source, often we are focused on cutting content, removing redundancies, and summarizing. But the reason why we use the knowledge graph is because seeing all the way that things relate is a valuable educational asset. Often, and this is really our goal, we can flesh out these relationships better than the book can. The challenge is finding them, which usually requires us to make inferences about the content we are mapping. Today, I'll be discussing inferred relation nodes. These are relation nodes that are not explicitly described or stated in the book, but ones that can be inferred from the content that you read. This will prevent your maps from being too linear and enhance them by allowing you to create connections that will really help people visualize all the ways that the content relates to each other. The book takes readers on a linear path through the content. The authors have to make tough decisions about what to include and where, and they have to use language or repetition to relate early content to later content. Sometimes the connections are clear, but sometimes they can be hard to follow. As you've come to learn, we do things differently. Our goal will be to ultimately show how all the concepts in a book are related, allowing the student to navigate concept by concept in a way that they see fit. This also avoids the confusion of trying to interpret or understand how authors relate the concepts, many of which that were discussed chapters earlier, to later concepts in the text. We start by identifying key concepts from the text that we plan on adding to the knowledge graph. In a textbook, identifying and even paraphrasing content from the text can be relatively easy. The challenging part is building relationships between the content or nodes. Sometimes the relationships are straightforward. Here we see content is used in a relatively linear pattern to create related nodes. This can happen quite frequently, and spelling out the relationships is not too difficult. Sometimes things are more complicated. In this example, a portion of the second chapter offers contextual or prerequisite information for content in chapter 3 and chapter 1. Further content from chapter 3 provides content for a more advanced node attached to the other node created from that chapter. This is why periodically reviewing and editing nodes is so helpful. The order in which content is read in the book does not always determine the order in which it would be placed in the map. Finally, we sometimes find ourselves in a situation where we have content that we know is important and we are unsure how it should be arranged in the map. This can be reconciled a number of ways. In the previous example, we saw that content that you will come across later might help arranging the would-be nodes that you currently have. But sometimes we can see that the concepts are related, but the book doesn't explicitly state this relationship. The examples I'll show you later include things like models or names or biographical content that just periodically gets mentioned throughout the chapters. Sometimes these will be tied to other nodes or concepts, but they will stand out because they can be related in a way that is simply not covered in the book. This is where we make inferences about the content and create a relation node to tie the concepts together. Basically, if you see a collection of nodes that could be categorized or collected together in a logical list, we can create a node that ties them together. This is almost always a relation node because that is where we describe more than one concept, making them the de facto node for lists. All right, so for this example, we're going to be looking at an economics textbook at some of these inferred relationships that you can make. So here we're in chapter 1, section 2, called History's Hockey Stick. And in this part, we get to the section, right, where it's Great Economists. And this section will pop up several times. And we get a sort of biographical information about Adam Smith, which obviously relates to the text. So as we keep going through this chapter, we'll eventually get to explaining the flat part of the hockey stick. And this section, it doesn't have one of those Great Economist blurbs, but it spends a lot of time talking about Thomas Malthus. And it's mostly focused on his theory and economic stagnation. But throughout the chapter, we get enough to get sort of this biographical information about Thomas Malthus, which is valuable because it contextualizes his theories. So now at two entirely separate parts of a chapter, we have economists that have been described, but there's never a part that's saying, you know, these are the economists that you will be looking at in this book. And this really even goes into chapter 8. Yeah, 8.1. We once again see this great economist section, and we have Friedrich Hayek. So as you can see here, the book at no point is having a chapter that's just the economists. It's making some effort to highlight economists, though one that we saw didn't even get a special section like this, but we had enough information. So while these economists are relevant to the theories that they're discussing in each chapter or whatever's being discussed in that chapter, we can also infer that from this book, we can make a list of economists, even though they don't provide one, and that list could then link to the economist theories, which then are linked to the other content from those chapters they're from. And it's just a different route of finding information, as well as providing what the book doesn't have, which is just a list of economists. So on One Academy here, we can see how that played out. We have great economists. This got this name from the little special sections they were in. And it includes Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, and Friedrich Hayek. So we made this list, and it's fairly early in the map, coming off of economy. But as you can see, it covers stuff from chapter 1 all the way into chapter 8. Here you can also see some good examples of using photos. And then through the biographical information, we get to some of their theories and ideas. And what's cool is because the way this book's written, especially with Adam Smith and Thomas Malthus, there's actually some comparisons made. So let's say somebody comes across the literature about the opposing views of Smith and Malthus. They could, in theory, find this note and then go backwards both to Adam Smith and Malthus and get that contextual information. So that's the value of having the list. On the other hand, someone might just be interested in knowing who some great economists are and find this list here and then follow down the information they want to know. Another example from this map is actually economic models. So we have a definition for what an economic model is. The book gave it to us. But the book was also spread out like these authors having examples of economic models. And even though there wasn't explicitly said, here are all the economic models, we made a node that links them all together. So you can chase down all these different models. And likewise, it allows you later on to have these different routes to finding information. Yeah, so it's always important to always be considering how all these things can be connected. And even if the book doesn't explicitly do it, you know, if you find stuff that is related that you can categorize a certain way, go ahead and throw them together in a list. It increases the connectivity between nodes, and it allows different routes for people to use to get to the information they want to find. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to this video. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me.